There was a man named Lemuel Gulliver. He lived in England with his wife and children. Gulliver loved traveling to faraway places. He didn't like staying at home for long. So he became a ship's doctor. This meant he helped sick and injured sailors on ships. One day he joined a ship that was going to sail across the sea. The journey started well, but soon disaster struck. A big storm came, and the wind blew very hard. The waves crashed against the ship, and everyone was scared. One night the ship hit a rock and broke into pieces. Gulliver fell into the water and swam as fast as he could until he reached an island. Exhausted, he lay down on the beach and fell asleep. When Gulliver woke up, he felt something strange. His arms and legs were tied to the ground. He couldn't move. At first, he was very frightened. Then he saw tiny people walking around him. These people were only 6 inches tall, about the size of your hand. The tiny people had tied Gulliver to the ground with ropes. They climbed all over him and spoke in a language he didn't understand. Gulliver tried to speak to them, but they didn't know his language either. After some time, one of the tiny men cut the ropes around Gulliver's head so he could turn it. Gulliver looked around and saw thousands of little people standing near him. They carried bows and arrows and looked ready to fight. Gulliver was hungry and thirsty. He pointed to his mouth to show that he needed food and water. The tiny people understood. They brought him bread, meat, and water. Gulliver ate everything quickly because he was so big, and he needed a lot of food. Later, the tiny people untied Gulliver's arms and legs, but they didn't let him go free. They made him promise not to hurt them. Gulliver promised, and they trusted him. The tiny people took Gulliver to their city. Their houses, trees, and animals were all very small. Gulliver had to be careful not to step on anything. The king and queen of the tiny people welcomed him. They called themselves the Lilliputians, and their land was called Lilliput. In Lilliput, Gulliver learned many things about the tiny people. For example, they had strange laws. If someone lied or stole, they were punished very harshly, but if someone followed the rules, they were rewarded. The Lilliputians also had enemies. Their neighbors, the Blefuscudians, lived on another island nearby. The two groups hated each other because of a silly argument. They disagreed about which end of an egg should be cracked open, big end or small end. Because of this disagreement, the Lilliputians and Blefuscudians often fought wars. Gulliver thought this was ridiculous. How could anyone fight over such a small thing? One day, the king of Lilliput asked Gulliver for help. The Blefuscudians had a strong navy, and the Lilliputians were afraid of being attacked. The king wanted Gulliver to capture the Blefuscudian ships. Gulliver agreed to help. He waded through the water to the Blefuscudian shore. The Blefuscudians were terrified when they saw him. Gulliver grabbed their ships and pulled them back to Lilliput. The Lilliputians cheered and celebrated. They called Gulliver a hero. But Gulliver wasn't happy for long. The king of Lilliput became greedy. He wanted Gulliver to destroy the Blefuscudians completely. Gulliver refused. He didn't want to hurt innocent people just because the king was angry. This made the king very upset. He decided that Gulliver was no longer useful. Some bad men in the kingdom even planned to kill Gulliver. They accused him of being a traitor. Gulliver found out about the plan and escaped. He ran to the beach and built a small boat. Then he sailed away from Lilliput. After a few days, a ship found him in the ocean. The sailors took Gulliver back to England, where he was finally safe. When Gulliver returned home, he told everyone about the Lilliputians. People were amazed by his story, but Gulliver didn't feel proud. He realized that humans sometimes act like the Lilliputians, fighting over small things and being selfish. Gulliver stayed at home for a while, but he still wanted to travel. Soon he joined another ship and set off on a new adventure. After his strange adventure in Lilliput, Gulliver stayed at home for a little while. But he couldn't stay still for long. He loved traveling too much. So he joined another ship and set off on a new journey. This time, his adventure would take him to a land very different from Lilliput. The ship sailed for many days, and everything seemed normal at first. But one day, a terrible storm hit. The wind blew hard and the waves grew bigger and bigger. The sailors fought to control the ship, but it was no use. The storm pushed them far off course. When the storm finally ended, the sailors saw an island in the distance. They were low on food and water, so they decided to stop there. Gulliver and a few other men got into a small boat and rowed to the shore. As soon as they landed, Gulliver noticed something strange. The grass was taller than him. The trees were enormous, and even the smallest flowers looked like giants. Gulliver realized that this was no ordinary island. Suddenly, he heard a loud noise. It sounded like thunder. But when Gulliver looked up, he saw something even more shocking, a huge farmer. The man was as tall as a house. Gulliver had never seen anyone so big. The giant farmer saw Gulliver and bent down to pick him up. At first, Gulliver was terrified. He thought the giant might eat him or crush him. But the farmer didn't hurt him. Instead, he carried Gulliver back to his house. The farmer's family was amazed when they saw Gulliver. They had never seen anything like him before. To them, Gulliver was like a tiny toy. The children wanted to play with him, and the farmer's wife put him on a table to keep him safe. Gulliver tried to explain who he was, but the giants didn't understand his language. Still, they treated him kindly. The farmer gave him food and water, and Gulliver ate as much as he could. But life with the giants wasn't easy. One day, the farmer decided to make money by showing Gulliver to other people. He took Gulliver to towns and villages where people paid to see the tiny man. Gulliver felt like a circus animal. He performed tricks like walking on a tightrope and climbing stairs just to entertain the crowd. Gulliver was tired and unhappy. He missed his home and his family, but he didn't know how to escape. Then one day, something terrible happened. A giant baby grabbed Gulliver and started playing with him. The baby laughed and shook Gulliver like a doll. Gulliver screamed for help, and luckily the mother came and saved him. After that, Gulliver knew he had to leave. One night, the farmer's wife left Gulliver alone in the garden. Gulliver saw a chance to escape. He climbed onto a tree and jumped onto the back of a huge bird. The bird flew away, carrying Gulliver high into the sky. After a while, the bird dropped Gulliver into the ocean. Gulliver was scared, but he held onto a piece of wood and floated until a ship found him. The sailors pulled him out of the water and took him back to England. When Gulliver returned home, he told his family about the giants. His wife and children listened in amazement, but Gulliver didn't feel proud. He realized that humans sometimes act like giants, thinking they are better than others and not caring about those who are smaller or weaker. Even though Gulliver was safe at home, he couldn't stop thinking about his adventures. He wanted to see more of the world. So, after a short rest, he joined another ship and set off on yet another journey. After his adventures in Lilliput and Brobdingnag, Gulliver thought he had seen everything the world could offer. But he was wrong. His thirst for travel hadn't been quenched yet. So, once again, he left his home and joined a ship. This time, his journey would take him to strange lands where science ruled, ghosts walked among the living, and immortality wasn't as wonderful as it seemed. The ship sailed smoothly for many days, but one day another storm appeared. The wind howled, and the waves crashed violently against the ship. The sailors fought hard to keep the ship steady, but it was no use. The storm pushed them far off course. When the storm finally ended, the sailors saw an island floating in the sky above.
Them!
Gulliver couldn't believe his eyes. The island was round and hovered high above the sea. It moved slowly, casting a shadow over the water. The sailors shouted and waved their arms to get the attention of the people on the island. Eventually, the island lowered itself close enough for Gulliver to climb aboard. When Gulliver stepped onto the floating island, he noticed something strange. The people there were very odd. They wore clothes covered in stars and moons, and their heads were always tilted upward, as if they were looking at the sky. They didn't pay much attention to Gulliver or each other. Instead, they carried strange tools and machines, muttering about math and science. Gulliver learned that this island was called Laputa. The Laputans were obsessed with abstract ideas and useless inventions. For example, one man was trying to extract sunlight from cucumbers, while another was building a house starting from the roof. None of their projects made sense to Gulliver, but the Laputans thought they were brilliant. The king of Laputa lived in a palace filled with telescopes and maps. He cared more about studying the stars than ruling his kingdom. In fact, the Laputans controlled the land below them by threatening to drop rocks on the villages if the people didn't obey. Gulliver found this both funny and cruel. After spending some time on Laputa, Gulliver decided to visit the land below the floating island. This land was called Balnibarbi, and it was even stranger than Laputa. The people there followed the advice of the Laputans, but their ideas didn't work. The farms were ruined, the houses were poorly built, and the people were poor and unhappy. Gulliver realized that blindly following impractical theories could lead to disaster. From Balnibarbi, Gulliver traveled to another place called Glubdubdrib, the island of sorcerers. Here, the governor had the power to summon ghosts from the past. Gulliver was thrilled. He asked to meet famous historical figures like Alexander the Great, Julius Caesar, and Homer. To his surprise, the ghosts appeared and spoke to him. But Gulliver also met some modern politicians and leaders. He was shocked to learn that they were not as great as people thought. Many of them were liars, thieves, and cowards. Gulliver began to lose respect for those in power. Next, Gulliver visited a kingdom called Lugnag. There he met a group of people called the Struldbrugs. These people were immortal. They could never die. At first, Gulliver thought this was wonderful. He imagined living forever and seeing all the wonders of the world, but the Struldbrugs taught him a harsh lesson. Even though they couldn't die, they still grew old and weak. Their bodies became frail, their minds became dull, and they lost all joy in life. They envied those who could die because death was a release from their endless suffering. Gulliver realized that immortality wasn't as desirable as it seemed. After leaving Lugnag, Gulliver returned to England. He told his family about the floating island, the useless inventions, the ghosts, and the immortal Struldbrugs. His wife and children listened in amazement, but Gulliver felt troubled. He had seen how humans could be blinded by pride, greed, and false knowledge. Even though Gulliver was safe at home, he couldn't stop thinking about his adventures. He wanted to see more of the world. So, after a short rest, he joined another ship and set off on yet another journey. This time, Gulliver's journey took him to a land ruled by intelligent horses. The horses were called Houyhnhnms, and they were wise, peaceful, and kind. They lived in harmony with nature and followed strict rules of reason and logic. When Gulliver arrived, he was surprised to see that the humans in this land, called Yahoos, were wild, dirty, and violent. They lived like animals, fighting over food and behaving cruelly to one another. Gulliver was horrified to realize that the Yahoos were very similar to humans in England. The Houyhnhnms welcomed Gulliver because he was different from the Yahoos. They listened to his stories about Europe and were shocked by the greed, war, and corruption he described. Gulliver admired the Houyhnhnms deeply and wished he could live like them forever. But the Houyhnhnms decided that Gulliver was too much. Like a Yahoo to stay with them, they told him he had to leave. Heartbroken, Gulliver built a small boat and sailed away. When Gulliver returned to England, he couldn't stand being around other humans. He felt disgusted by their behavior and spent most of his time talking to horses instead. Gulliver had changed forever because of his journey. Gulliver's travels taught him many lessons about human nature, society, and himself. He saw the best and worst of humanity and realized how flawed people can be. Though his adventures were exciting, they also made him question whether humans could ever truly improve. And so Gulliver's story came to an end, but his lessons live on. Thank you for joining me on this journey through Gulliver's travels. I hope you enjoyed the story and learned something new along the way. Remember, whether you're big or small, rich or poor, human or horse, we all have something to teach and something to learn from one another.